Good afternoon, everyone. We'll get started here in just a second. Hello, everyone. This is Heidi Kurtz with the National Association of Energy Service Companies, and I want to welcome you to our Building to Grid webinar. There will be an AIA CEU available for this webinar. Just contact me by email afterwards, and we will get you the certificate and evaluation form within a few days this week. We are recording the webinar, and I will distribute the recording and a copy of the presentation by email to everyone signed up for the webinar. It'll take a couple days, but you'll have that by this week as well. We're going to do questions and answers at the end of the webinar. You can submit your questions through the questions feature. Okay, so today we are very fortunate to have Casey Talon present this webinar. She is a research director with Navigant, contributing to intelligent building management solutions. With a background in economics, environmental science, and policy, she has deep experience as an analyst and consultant in the building technology sector. Talon holds the Master of Public Administration degree from Columbia University School of International and Public Affairs and a BA in Economics from the University of Wisconsin at Madison. Casey, welcome and thank you, and I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you. I'm really excited to be here today. I appreciate the opportunity to share some of our ongoing research, and I have a section at the end for Q&A as well. So to start things off, the presentation will flow in 5 main sections here. Starting off, I just want to provide some context, sort of the development of what we have seen or evolution of the automation and controls industry, the way we look at the foundation for the smart buildings market at Navigant Research, and then dive in for a few minutes about how do we actually define a smart building? What does that mean? It can mean a lot of different things to a lot of different people, so spend a few minutes kind of level setting from our perspective. And then dive into some of the perspectives that we're hearing from customers. How are their expectations changing for technologies and the way in which they interact and work and live within their buildings? When we think about the ecosystem of technologies, there are some key enabling solutions that really redefine a building as a smart building. We're going to take a look at real-time location services as one example. And then as an analyst, I love to sort of project what we expect to happen in the future. So we'll spend a few minutes at the end looking at the idea of next-gen buildings, emerging opportunities in a low-carbon future, and our vision of building to grid. As Heidi mentioned, this is just the summary of our objectives today based on the goal of the continuing education. So we have seen that summary from the registration. That's just a snapshot on what I hope you can walk away with from today's hour long together. All right, so to start things off, I think it's helpful to sort of level set when we think about the idea of the smart building. Automation and control is obviously not a new technology per se, that there's been automation controls in buildings for decades. And we recognize that in a certain respect, this is an evolution. And so these are the timeframes we use to sort of guide these conversations and sort of set the context. We recognize that there's a huge industry around building management systems that's been around, before 2006. We kind of characterize these as legacy controls. Really, these were positioned as solutions to improve the operations of the very largest buildings, your high-rise, your buildings with complex systems for heating and cooling, physical security. Those systems have been around for a long time. They were notably often closed, run on proprietary systems, and really complex in terms of the way in which they served those large buildings. Where we started to see the beginning of what we characterize as the smart buildings market was around 2006. And that was really where we started to see some disruption, where increasingly cloud-based solutions were software offerings that were positioned to provide a different kind of insight into building performance. Initially, these were often characterized as building energy management systems. That's sort of the classification we used, thinking about adding a layer of software that would translate the data from maybe a building management system or some other data stream, could have been metering data, but about how your building is operating, translate it into energy consumption, and therefore identifying opportunities for savings around energy efficiency as those systems were run more optimally. This was a point of also disruption because it was the entrance of a lot of innovative startups, nimble companies that came in and said, we can make your information actionable, but we could also help you if you weren't just in that sort of top tier of building owners with those very large buildings. We can start to gather insight into smaller buildings that may not have those traditional automation and control solutions. As we've moved forward, we started to talk about kind of an era of innovation. This is where we saw increasing focus on the analytics. So getting more sophisticated with the data, the use of the data, maybe increasingly comprehensive in the set of data that was being assessed around building performance. And these were often sold as software as a service options, so sort of leveraging the model used in other business applications. This was really about innovation. And now looking forward, what we're exploring is the even more increasing array of analytics, the more sophisticated use of machine learning, the development of artificial intelligence into some of these solutions, and also a broadening ecosystem of solutions leveraging data from the building systems, but then expanding, the impact of the Internet of Things and IoT, all of the devices that are being deployed in buildings, all of those different data streams, and then optimizing those systems alongside other assets that may be on site. So if you think of a college campus, for example, having each of those buildings being managed in an automated way, based on data that's coming from devices and systems, alongside with information around other on-site renewables. There could be solar, there could be storage, there could be EV charging systems, and that's sort of the vision of the next generation in smart buildings, and where we'll go toward at the end of the presentation around Building-to-Grid. So hopefully that provided a bit of context, kind of how we've seen the market develop, and the background for today's conversation. There's just a bit of a delay here. Bear with me for 1 second. On how do you there we go. Okay, so from there, I want to spend a few minutes around the idea of how you define the smart building. I think we hear in our research and the conversations we have that what is smart could be quite different depending on where you are in the market. On the left, you'll see a very long and wordy definition. As an analyst, I read a bunch of reports. I like to have a specific definition. It's comprehensive. But the idea being that there is a vision of a truly smart building. And at that point, it's very set of comprehensive enabling technologies, very cohesive, interoperable environment, gathering data from all aspects of the building, as well as the occupants, the business at hand within that building. That's the pinnacle. But the reality we recognize is that may not be the goal of every customer, and it also may not align with really what the objectives are. So what are the sort of dynamics that we think help to define what is a smart building, or what is the most effective combination of smart building solutions for optimizing a specific building? We think there are a few different dimensions to consider. The first off is just, where are you coming from? Is this objective to improve the operation of an existing building? Is that building very large with existing technology? Is it old? Is it new construction? All of those aspects define what will it take to transform that facility into a smarter building. And that is all reflective as well in terms of the goals of those customers. The second question is, Is this a specific individual facility that's small, medium, or large, or is it a portfolio of a mixed set of these buildings? This is a REIT, for example, trying to optimize a variety of buildings. Maybe it's a fast serve restaurant owner who has 10 convenience stores or fast serve restaurants. All of those dynamics we think really play into the definition and the objectives when you think about the idea of the smart building. And then finally, the bottom, those symbols are intended to reflect different business sectors. So whether you're in higher education, real estate, commercial office, healthcare, you have different priorities, and energy is probably a foundational influence. The idea of increasing energy efficiency is valuable, but where that fits in your priorities may be different. And we'll dive in a little bit about the idea of developing very specific use cases when you think about the opportunity for the smart building going forward. But hopefully that helps sort of set the stage in terms of how we define the smart building. On the next slide, I'm going to talk a little bit about the idea of this shifting set of customer expectations. So here are some big numbers. This is how we think about what's really just changing at the macro level and driving toward a reality where everything is digital. People want data-driven tools to help them make decisions in life. And that translates, we'll argue, toward the built environment. One thing that we hear increasingly is that the focus on climate change, climate emergency, climate crisis is becoming a priority, particularly for kind of Fortune 100 companies. But that underlying that, even just the idea of sustainability, maybe in a depoliticized world, also is really, really important. And part of the dynamic is that there are just huge changes at the macroeconomic. The population is growing, a rise of the middle class, huge populations driving into urban centers. The idea that there's just the whole impact of climate change. These are all the dynamics that we see helping to drive interest in digital solutions and really changing the way customers start to think about investment in technologies across the board. Apologies for the delay here. Okay, so thinking now, what does this mean in terms of the evolution of technology? So I'm going to dive in a little bit about what is the difference for a smart building solution and those technologies. And at the core, we talk about the idea of IT/OT convergence. This is that information technologies are starting to merge with those historic operation technologies. In the world of the smart building, we're thinking about how are building systems becoming IP addressable, how are they becoming connected, and having data coming out of those systems that in new ways. And I'd argue that this is multiple layers of impact. So there's the infrastructure, right? So where you're starting from. Do you have legacy controls, as we talked about a few minutes ago? They may be of varying ages and conditions and use. Are you going to deploy new IoT layer of hardware? And that could be those devices that gather data from new areas within a building, or a completely new set of hardware in a smaller building, for example. Hey, the analytics is a really key part of this equation. This is really about translating all that data into actionable information. And that is the foundation. How is the sort of brains of these solutions, how is that becoming increasingly sophisticated? And all of that's important, but what we hear over and over again is customers don't want just more data. They have to have that be meaningful. And so how are these solutions designed to provide true insights? How is that delivered? Are there reports? Are they being pushed in different ways to different users? How is it accessed depending on the role within the building? And then finally, action. Is it actually automated? Is it pushing just more strategic actions by the facility management team? All of that plays into this. And at the core is the journey toward an increasingly smart building, but that IT/OT convergence is also all about changing the way the business of managing these buildings happens today and into the future. On the next slide. Here we go. So the IT piece of it, thinking about this convergence, I wanted to talk a little bit about data. And what we hear is really a critical foundation when we think about the investment in these solutions. I think it's something a lot of customers that you deal with are grappling with. Also opportunities for you to provide advisory and partnership to deal with some of these really huge issues that are only going to become increasingly important over time. The idea that you're having a really large increase in just the volume of data. You have all of these devices being deployed, generating data. Then how is that being integrated into other systems on site? How are you addressing the issue of cybersecurity and physical security, as well as privacy and data ownership? Each of these issues are certainly not mutually exclusive, they're related, but we hear increasingly customers recognize that they need to address these issues, but they're challenged. And this gets a little bit back to that idea of the IT/OT convergence. Historically, folks we recognize in facilities management may have incredible expertise around traditional building systems, their HVAC, their lighting, what have you, but less familiarity with the questions around the IT piece of it and how it's connecting to that network. So just some of the dynamics that we're seeing underlying this evolution in the smart building space. And then when we think about shifting customer expectations, as I mentioned earlier, we recognize that the energy efficiency impacts of some of these solutions are incredibly valuable. From a conversation with customers, we hear over and over that that's a really transparent way of demonstrating impact. You can see the return on investment is a reduction in your monthly utility bill. I think that resonates with any kind of customer, independent of their line of business. But what we've been hearing as well is that there are different priorities and different kinds of key pain points for different customers. And that understanding that and translating how these solutions address those challenges can be really impactful on a couple of different dimensions. So, here we have some key segments that we have heard a lot about as early adopters or those investing in smart building solutions. And so I want to just kind of walk through a few of these examples to show what that looks like. So for example, in retail, we've heard about the retail apocalypse. Everything's online now. No one's going to a brick and mortar store. Well, maybe that's coming, but I think what we've been hearing is there's an opportunity to tackle that challenge or that risk by leveraging smart building solutions, by deploying the kinds of solutions that help to create a more seamless experience between maybe that mobile application that you started to shop on, then your experience when you maybe walk in that store and purchase that whatever that purchase is you're making. So there's behind that experience can be a set of smart building enabling technologies. And in healthcare, just the amount of uncertainty and consolidation happening as the industry goes under huge transformation, the merging of consolidation of the hospitals, the pressure on margins, and patient care. Those are huge challenges. Well, if you have, say, deploy RTLS, which we're going to talk about, that can help with asset tracking, have your nursing staff more efficient. These are all ways in which you're going to improve patient care, shorten time potentially. These are narratives that we start to hear explored. Some of these narratives are very hard to quantify. It's not necessarily a one-to-one correlation between a deployment of a specific technology, but it's an important conversation to have, and there's certainly a relationship there. In higher education, there's statistics out there just about the pure shift in demographics, some shrinking numbers in certain populations going into higher ed. And so how are universities competing for those students? How are they going to demonstrate that they're the best university? And awareness that the next generation that's going into higher ed prioritizes sustainability and is focused on climate change. Can you show that your building is smart and efficient and as advanced as possible to really differentiate yourself? In real estate, there's been lots of news about the evolution from co-working to hoteling, and how do you leverage technology to make sure you're utilizing the space you have and ensuring you're leasing the right amount of space. The energy transformation, this is all about the change in the relationship between energy supply and demand, the role of distributed energy resources. There's a lot of technology that will help make that transformation happen. So those are just a few examples of the narrative, the way in which that we hear shifting customer expectations and how their goals can start to be achieved by investing in some of these smart building solutions. All right, so I've said enabling technologies. One snapshot here on this idea of real-time location services. This is a way of thinking about leveraging IoT devices and translating that into information in real time that can help make a worker more productive in different ways, or an occupant of that building more productive. So this is a schematic from Honeywell, just an example of what that might look like, because I'm going to talk about kind of the use cases, the benefits that happen when you deploy these technologies, but I think it's helpful to have a visual to start things off. So this is from Honeywell, really demonstrating the benefits for an industrial worker. They can utilize that to have better real-time insight into their environment and their operations, and really help with, say, safety in a more industrial environment. So that can be a tool to really help your employees function, improve their productivity. And then I'm also going to switch to an example of another application. This is indoor positioning. This is from Acuity Brands. This is an example of their solution navigator, real-time location services. And really here again, it's about seeing you can deploy these technologies. This is in a lighting environment. That lighting can be very ubiquitous in terms of how it's designed. There's many points you could put within a building's lighting system that you'll gather a huge volume of data. And that can be forced through applications that can transform the way your occupants interact in a building. So there's a lot of strong examples for that in the retail environment, for example. So as I mentioned, this idea of kind of omni-channel shopping experience. I don't know if any of you have had the experience, you walk into, say, a big box retailer, you're using their app, and it could pop up that you have been looking at something online, and you're opting in, and it's going to navigate you on a map right to the aisle where that product is, or identify how many of those products are available in that particular store. So really the idea that it's a seamless experience. You're really utilizing data to help direct your shopping within that brick and mortar store, but yet utilizing data in a new way. Okay. On the back end, so this is also, so those systems can change the experience. There's also a way in which that's presented and can be very helpful, quickly visible to those workers on site. This is an illustration of a patient dashboard. So in the healthcare situation, you can see this sort of heat mapping help prioritize actions for the workforce. And I think the idea is really that you can deploy this technology and use all of that data to provide really actionable insights for your workers. And this helps to provide more efficiency and amplify the benefits you already may see from the energy efficiency benefits of some of these solutions. Productivity, again, can be hard to correlate one-to-one, but it's certainly tools that have really valuable impact for these workers. So I want to talk a little bit about the drivers. Apologies for the delays here. So thanks for being with me. So I think we've talked about quite a few of these, and the idea is just that this becomes a much more set of strategic tools. You're not just providing a very tactical solution that's addressing the pain points, say, for the facility manager, but that you're providing a platform for technologies that impact a much broader set of stakeholders. So when you think about the smart building investment versus maybe a traditional energy efficiency retrofit, what we hear increasingly is the conversation is elevated and then starts to really capture the attention and mind share of the executives. We talk about the idea of branding, that there's a recognition that your buildings are becoming a part of the brand of your business. So when we think about customers, say, in the commercial office space, that where a Class A building may have been defined as by aesthetics of a marble entryway, a decade ago, that now it's really how digital is that building and that experience? How much information is available when you drive into that garage? Are you driven to the right elevator, to the right desk you're just going to be at for that day, identifying when there's a conference room available? And I think that's an important framing that is getting the attention of a lot of these executives, is that it's about shifting the conversation from a very internal perspective on the performance of a building and just operations, very tactical, to about a focus on the occupant. That's an important shift that we've seen increasingly really within the last year and a half or so. So this lens on the occupant experience is really becoming critical across the board. There's all right. Oh, so hopefully that the idea of the real-time location services provided some insight into the impact of investing in these enabling technologies. I wanted to now shift a little bit to what is the future of the smart building. And so this is an image from our energy cloud thought leadership from Navigant. This is used across our organization. I wanted to just provide this as a illustration of what we think, where we're going. So on the left, you'll see that circle around smart buildings. Smart buildings have a huge role to play as the energy ecosystem continues to evolve. We have recognized the relationship between energy supply and demand as being really a linear one-way street for decades. There was generally large central fossil fuel-based generation, and then a whole array of demand. Buildings just demanded energy, they were provided it from the grid, and that was that. We've seen this evolution to what we're calling the energy cloud as really an ecosystem of platforms that are much more dynamic and fluid, and the relationship between energy supply and demand is being redefined. Buildings can become a part of that ecosystem when they have reached that sort of pinnacle of what we talked about at the beginning of the smart building, and then that they're leveraging the on-site resources that might be, again, storage, EV charging systems, solar, that kind of array of distributed energy resources. At that point, we start to think of those facilities as an asset in Building-to-Grid, and really a way to start to generate new value for building owners. And that fundamentally comes back to data. The data enables the operation of those buildings in a completely new way. But sort of how do we get there? I wanted to shift into thinking, what is this? How do we get? What's the journey look like? And what would it mean for the folks on the phone? How do you envision a different engagement with your customers? When we look at the transformation of a facility into a smart building, we do think it's a journey, and there's 3 sort of steps within that process. Certainly, there's the technical aspect of navigating the selection of the enabling technologies, of assessing the existing legacy systems, and then mapping out how to actually integrate those systems or integrate those data streams. How do you make those systems interoperable to enable more automated performance improvements? And how do you select between the different options in the marketplace? I think those are all questions that the folks on the phone probably have great expertise and experience in specifying solutions. And so what is that, how does that look as you become a partner to provide more cohesive strategy, not just in deploying a retrofit for a specific piece of HVAC equipment, for example, but really creating a longer term strategy for transforming into a smart building. The second part of that is the financial piece. How do you overcome the hurdles, financial hurdles for payback as you look to more comprehensive solutions? That might be an opportunity to really engage with your customers that have been performance contracting into new energy as a service relationships. It may also open the door to maybe a broader set of customers kind of beyond that MUSH market that have been really important foundational customers for the performance contract. So new ways that you can engage and deploy comprehensive sets of solutions, transfer ownership, really redefine that relationship. And then finally, I think without it's maybe far off as a significant challenge is this issue of change management. Really, this gets to that core of the people part of the process for the convergence of IT and OT. There's sort of two pieces to that puzzle. That's what this slide is intended to sort of introduce. Really, it's about breaking down silos. That in a customer's organization, historically, we recognize from our research that the facility management staff may operate in isolation with different budgets and different decision-making strategies than their IT department, than the C-suite. And when you start to talk about these very comprehensive long-term plans for a smart building, those silos have to break down for success. It's something we hear over and over again. And so that's a change in the way the building operations starts to roll into the broader way the business is run. There's also a challenge of the actual human capital, something we've had a lot of conversations around. There's research showing just that the facility management industry is undergoing change, that there's an element of aging workforce, there's an element of challenge in recruitment, and then also that there's a challenge in identifying how to redefine roles and expectations as building systems become increasingly digital and merged. And how do you also invest in staff that has the chops to run a secure and private IT infrastructure with an understanding of the requirements for facility management? Those are all big challenges that we hear about as potential inhibitors to further adoption of smart buildings across the board. So what does that mean? I have this framed here as the idea of building to grid, but this could certainly be helping a customer who's just starting to invest in some smart building technology. I just think when you envision yourself as a partner with a sophisticated customer looking for long-term engagement, it's a really interesting way to think through the potential opportunities. The idea is that this, as we mentioned, is a journey. At the outset, the customer needs a vision and potentially a partner to help them understand what's possible. And what are the enabling technologies out there? What's the ecosystem of opportunity? How did they start to invest? What should they do first? How do they assess what they already have? Those are a lot of really big questions. How do you bring the right people to the table? And a huge opportunity for partners in new and kind of redefined advisory roles. And then making investment, investing first, second, and third, or the financing piece that you may all be in a very good position, or through your partners. And then finally, how do you launch from there and take advantage of some of the emerging opportunities on the building to grid front, that next generation of building where you may potentially be generating energy, not just consuming. So, I hope that kind of lays out a few of the opportunities that we see emerging. And again, we believe that this idea, here we have it classified as an orchestrator, B2G Orchestrator. This is really the idea of a partner that is in an ongoing relationship. I think there's many cases of interest in the recurring revenue that would come from this as well, but that there's a recurring process that you may make investments and retrofits in a building, and over time there will be continuous investment to ensure those systems are up to date, are the most efficient, are suited to be gathering the right set of data and automation and controls. And that's an ongoing conversation, reassessing how the building is performing relative to the goals, and that having one partner to help you through that journey can be really valuable. So this is a sort of idea of what that may look like in the different kinds of skills required along that journey. So one thing that we've looked at is, who's well positioned to take that kind of role. And I think there are strengths from different categories of solution providers. And there may be some of you out there that have skill sets and parts of your business that could operate from every step. Others that may want to look at, investing in a partnership, developing a strategic partnership, or building a new solution kind of organically, or acquiring some of these niche providers that are delivering some of these services and technologies at maybe even a regional level that could be built upon. So those are some of the things that we're looking at around opportunities going forward. So this is just another aspect of the idea that I think the technology piece of the puzzle has really come a long way and is pretty mature. We recognize that the people side of it is much more challenging. So this is just intended to sort of frame that out again, that this is what really will it take to get to that future reality of next generation smart buildings. And as I mentioned, there's this sort of technical piece, financial and process, and then walk through the demand side, kind of challenges of breaking down silos. But also for you guys on the phone, one thing that we've heard in our ongoing research is that there's also challenges for you guys. That the product development process may look completely different from an engineering and kind of traditional manufacturer than from an agile focused software supplier. And so how do you marry those two things to try to bring a cohesive solution to market? How do you marry the domain knowledge around facilities management, the technology knowledge of the cloud and IT infrastructure and the networks that you need? And those are questions that I think have to be considered as we evolve toward this more sophisticated smart building future. So again, the idea is that there's an opportunity map here. I just again looked at on the left, kind of the array of steps that may be taken with a customer as they go through this journey, and that there's idea that you can stack the value as a contractor. You can build upon the skills you have and bring this more cohesive solution to market and help your customers by investing in the right solutions at the right time, ensuring that they're secure, their data is private, their privacy is retained, and kind of help them navigate the certainly evolving reality of owning and operating commercial buildings. So I wanted that really covers most of the content I had for today. Here are a few links you'll see when you get the slides around our research services. There's a free white paper that further articulates some of what I outlined in the Building-to-Grid pieces of this. And then we have some on-demand webinars. I wanted to open it up for questions as well. And also, if any of you will be at AHR or Distributech, please reach out. We'd love to meet up in person. Any questions from the audience?
Can you see the question?
I cannot.
You cannot. Okay, I'll read it. Hold on. Why do you exclude residences from your definition of a smart building?
Oh, good point. No, so this particular presentation was definitely focused on the commercial segment. We have a whole host of research around smart home and home energy management. I would say that a lot of from a technical side, there'd be some serious, very significant parallels. I think the whole question around the smart home, the development of smart home, is really interesting when you think about the supply chain and just the retail component and just consumer choice. There's parallels, but there are differences. And in the vision of the building-to-grid reality going forward, we definitely see an important play for smart homes, particularly when you think of smart homes in the aggregate, say a smart residential development or high-rise multifamily. So that was just about the focus of this particular presentation, but we definitely have some research and some perspective on the residential side as well.
Okay, another question is, can you discuss best resources for cybersecurity in smart buildings?
Yes, there is actually a group, a consortium that's been organized by the group called Realcomm. They put on the IBCon conference each year. And if you were to go to their website, you'd be able to find it. I'm not sure of the name of it off the top of my head, but if you went to Realcomm, it's REALCOMM. They host these events and they have this consortium, and many of which are CIOs from some of the big real estate companies, but they're convening and they're providing content and a platform for conversation and resource sharing around cybersecurity specific for smart buildings. So I would say that'd be a great group to look at. And then I think, some of the government labs are definitely looking into this as well. There's research coming out of Berkeley and DOE, but in maybe a bit more academic way.
Okay, here's another. What is the valuation given to the services that smart buildings can provide to the grid?
So in terms of value the buildings can give to the grid, I think it comes down to the ability to provide more reliable and resilient power. So today we have traditional demand response programs. You can think of this as an evolution from those traditional demand response programs to near real-time demand management. So say there's an event, there's a major heat wave coming, that the infrastructure would provide an automated alert. The building may tune down its lighting and heating, reduce that energy consumption to smooth out some of that demand and potentially eliminate the blackout. That's sort of a near term kind of just evolution of what's already today. I think from a grid perspective going forward, in the building to grid environment where you have grid integrated renewables, say solar on site of a campus, it again helps with some of that smoothing and ensuring just that, again, reliable and resilient power. I think for some customers, it may become a matter of they just are their own power generation. So that is one of the challenging pieces of the equation, is how to balance that relationship with the grid. And it's something I think a lot of utilities are exploring as they potentially, there's a risk of losing some of their biggest customers as the distributed energy becomes more cost effective and available. And we have teams of folks looking at sort of the grid side of this equation in much greater detail. And if you'd like to follow up on that, I'd be happy to make some introductions or share some resources on that.
Okay, can you speak to cybersecurity and how this has limited or maybe a springboard to advance more smart building options?
Yeah, so I think there's a couple of elements. So from a cybersecurity piece of the equation, I think in one respect, there's just an increasing array of vulnerabilities as more systems are IP addressable and online. And one of the challenges I think is where customers, if they don't have a partner, if they don't know the right questions to ask, they could be deploying a lot of these technologies without the right protocols and the right standards approaches to ensure cybersecurity. So that's creating an opportunity, I think, for partners to come in and ensure those customers are aware of those risks. I think that there has been notable events that have helped to elevate the conversation. There was this breach at Target that everyone would sort of talk about as this was a breach through a facility management or a building automation system. The details of that wasn't exactly a building automation system leak, but that conversation elevated the issue of cybersecurity in a really important way across the sort of world of facility management. So I think overall, we hear that customers are just increasingly aware they've got to ask, but they find it overwhelming. And I think there's going to be opportunities for new business models like network as a service, new opportunities to partner with customers as they select and deploy technology to ensure it's secure. I think that one of the big challenges that's still being ironed out is who owns that risk and how that relationship moves forward. So as you deploy these smart building technologies, where's the onus of that risk? If a breach happens, how does that play out? So those are some of the dynamics I think are really important to consider.
What do you think the engagement model looks like from B2G vendor to building owner?
Yeah, so I think the engagement model could vary. I think it's a little bit yet to be seen. I think that there are some interesting examples along the energy as a service business model where a large player could come in, say to a corporate campus, take over their responsibility around their energy consumption and deploy distribute energy technologies, deploy automation and controls. They may own that and operate that on behalf of that building owner. I think there are options that are more of a partnership. And I think it's all a little bit evolving depending on ownership of the assets, kind of where is the building in terms of the maturity spectrum to start that conversation. And also what are you trying to achieve? But those are some of the early examples that I think are pretty powerful to consider.
Okay. Is a smart building one that is ready to participate in the microgrid?
Interesting. Yeah, I mean, I think microgrids certainly can leverage smart buildings, but I think smart buildings can also operate without being a part of a microgrid. And again, kind of depending on the customer's objectives. So for example, there could be a very smart building that will always utilize grid energy and will always just utilize the energy provided by an electric utility. And there are others that are going to become a part of a microgrid that maybe is truly an island in itself. I would say I have greater insight into the smart building piece of that equation. And we have a lot of perspective from the microgrid side, how the building interplays with that in the microgrid or the virtual power plant. So I've got some colleagues that I could certainly connect you with as well.
I guess some people are having trouble hearing me. I don't know if it's my connection or what, but I'm hoping that these come through more clearly in the recording. So I apologize for that. I think that's it for now. And again, Casey's information is posted here, and we will be sending you more information this week, including if you need CEUs for this webinar, please send me an email. It's heidi.kurtz@nasco.org. I'm on the website as well. And you'll have my email when I send out the recording and the presentation. So Casey, thank you very much for doing this for us, and we look forward to working with you again in the future.
Thank you very much, and happy to connect if folks have questions after the call.
Okay, thanks. That's great. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.